Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Effective Teaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dan, and today I have Esther with me. And Esther, you've been listening to the podcast for a while, and you sent me an email the other day after listening to one of my episodes, and we ended up chatting via email about what you do in your classroom to help your students to become lifelong learners. And you talked about this process that you use at the beginning of your classes where you sit down with your students in a circle and chat to them and find out more about them and who they are and their learning process, which I thought sounded super interesting and would be something that would be worth having you on here to chat about. So can you just, before you get started into talking about that, can you tell everyone where you're from and what you teach?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. I am PhD teacher at Oxford Falls Grammar on the Northern Beaches, and I'm Year 12 coordinator, soon to not be. And I teach 7 through 12 PE and PASS and all the associated things with that. Yeah.
Awesome. So this circle chat that you start your class with, can you just describe it in general for me? How do you actually, what are you doing with it? What's your process? The what? What is it?
What is it? It's basically so I can hear every student at the start of the lesson. So everyone gets heard. That's really its purpose. And it's also a casual way of organising the class for it to start, like the start of the class once circle time has started. Yeah.
Cool. And so can you just describe, as your students walk in, do they go to their desks first? Have you got the chairs set up already? And then what kind of things do you chat about in this circle?
So it changes depending on the room that we have or the class that it is, whether it's a junior class or a senior class. Often senior classes are a lot smaller, so it's a lot easier to kind of make a circle around the desks and not have to do a lot of change. If it's a really big class of 30 Year 7 girls and they're all woo, as soon as they walk in and hyperactive, sometimes it takes a bit of time to really organise a circle, but I usually find taking the time to organise the circle is worth it because it brings everyone right in. And they know that I don't have to say, we just walk in and they set up circles. And then I just pose a question for them. We've tried varieties of they do a question or whatever. We've tried so many different things, but generally the general rule is I've got a pre-prepared question and everyone answers it. The exception is someone really doesn't want to. We've talked about, if that's a genuine question that you find hard to answer, they can not answer, or they can say skip and come back. But we try and give everyone a turn. Yeah.
Cool. And then are your questions always linked to what you're teaching that lesson? Are they just random questions you put out of a jar somewhere? You've Googled them and just going, what kind of questions should I ask students to get to know them? What are you doing?
It's really mixed. So sometimes it's really clearly linked to the lesson, but it's nice to start with something really open-ended because sometimes I find a lot in PHPE, we're giving a lot of answers, and sometimes some content areas I find it hard to get them to ask the questions because there's so much I need them to know. Yeah, sometimes it's linked and it's open and there's some really good different answers. Sometimes I provide a question and no one likes it, and 3 kids in, they go, Miss, new question, this one sucks. So I'm like, yeah, fair enough, it's not working. So we just change it up on the spot. Sometimes it's very personal and sometimes it goes very deep in that moment, and I usually roll with it if I don't have a really pressing thing that I need to get done. Sometimes it's super shallow, and oftentimes if I'm in a rush and we just don't have time for a good combo, or they've come in at the end of, an incursion and we've only got 20 minutes or something like that, I'll just say, how you're feeling between 1 and 5. 5 you feel, something like that, but just so I can gauge where they're all at before we get stuck into it. And oftentimes I'll find there's a lot of 1.5, and it really helps me. Oh, okay, they're feeling there. It gives me a good starting point for my lesson. It feels like a cheat. It feels like sneaky, oh, awesome. I've just hacked. Great. Now I know where to start. So the questions really range. Sometimes it is I'm on my way and I'm literally on my phone typing into Google for a new question because I forgot a circle time question. And other times I've prepared it weeks in advance and it's building up from other ones and that kind of thing. So I've obviously got documents saved where I've just got the questions I've used because classes don't respond well if you've asked us that before. And they remember, trust me, they remember. So it works really well in online learning because we started every lesson again with circle time, but it was more like grid time. We just go through the grid. And students really appreciated it. I think they just find it familiar no matter what happens. And even if I'm absent and I leave a casual lesson, there's always a circle time question. So they still have the same rhythm. So yeah, but it's totally not my idea. Totally stole it. Yeah.
Where'd you steal it from?
I saw it when I was teaching in Canada. So they used to do it in a different way. But yeah, on my exchange there, that was a structure that they did in that school. It was a smaller school, a really community feel. So big circle discussion questions was the vibe there. So I just borrowed it.
Now, would you be willing to share your document, your list of questions? Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you are listening and you would like to get that list of questions, you can head over to teacherspd.net/95 and I'll have a way there for you to get that document with all those questions. Can you give us a few examples of what you've asked for your kids this year?
Yeah. So some ones that aren't related to content would be, what's the best ice cream topping? Or if you were a fruit, what would you be? Or are you more like your mum or your dad and why? Who is your closest friend and what's made you so close? Like, it could just be totally random. Other questions could be, what is your least favourite activity that we've ever done? Or which part of the syllabus do you think sucks? Or if you could be the teacher, how would you teach what we learned yesterday? Or anything like that. Sometimes I learn from them. Like, I can ask them something and it really helps me, and sometimes I take notes. So I did a series of questions over the last year with my year 12 class, and I slowly asked them so many questions about themselves so that when it came to the end just now, I put together a small gift and a card for each of them that was personalised based on their answers to questions in circle time. And it was silly things like, what's your favourite confectionery? Or like, what genre of books do you like? But it enabled me to then know them. And you can't often just know them when you're trying to get content down their throats. So I think that's been my favourite and their favourite part, because they like to be known. So so it does sometimes link. If it's content related, I might say it might be something to do with how many of you have ever had an experience with prescription medication. What's the story? Or something like that, if you're happy to share. Or something like that. Or have you ever, first aid works really well, like, have you ever experienced a broken limb? Or anyway, lots of stories come out, and or embarrassing moments. Yeah, it's really fun. It's one of my favourite parts of the lesson.
That's fantastic. And I think getting to know your students is one of the most important things that we do as a teacher. I think if you're not getting to know your students personally, then it's very hard as a teacher to motivate them. It's very hard for you to actually appear like you're even on their side if you don't really know them. Particularly, I used to find with large numbers of students that I would be teaching, because in PDH we tend to have a lot of classes every year, and you've got to learn all these kids' names and stuff.
Yeah.
And if you don't get those kids' names down by the end of the first couple of weeks, they already are starting to disconnect from you because you haven't quite made that connection. So can you tell me, what are some of the benefits and advantages of this process that you've seen in your classroom when you're doing this learning then with your students after the circles, and you're starting to try and get them to enjoy learning, get the skills of learning, or just get the content down their throats?
Yeah.
What benefits have you seen from the circle activities for the learning aspect of what happens in your classroom?
Yeah, sure. I would say when they're on side and when you have a strong relationship or a growing relationship, it's a lot easier to communicate. And I feel heard, and I think the students feel heard when we've got more than just peer content to talk about. So we know other things about one another. And as a teacher, I answer every question as well. And I answer what number I am between 1 and 5. They know how I'm feeling too. And I think that helps them approach me and know how to respond to my teaching. In terms of learning as well, I think the context it provides. So in a circle time recently, one of my students said, it was something like, what's been a challenge? And it was a disaster in the home, like something got destroyed in the home from some natural weather or fire or something like that. And they had moved house 10 times in 13 weeks or something crazy, like a really interesting thing that I would not have learnt from circle time. And I mean, I'm sure the school would have been notified, you know what I mean? But it was something that was quite personal, and I could then see, that's why those 2 tasks weren't completed, and it helped me gauge better where the student was at without them having to in the moment try and justify something. So even, I guess, contextually, it really helps. But in terms of practical, like, understanding of content and those kinds of things, the way that we start is super inclusive. The reason it's a circle is that no one's in front of anyone. There's no desk with someone behind the desk and anything like that. There's no overlapping. So if it's cracked and we're starting off with circle time, there's no shoulder in front of another person. Everyone's open. And we talk about how that's because we all are included. We're all important. Everyone's valued and everyone's a part of it. And I think that sets a precedent for the remainder of the lesson, knowing that no matter the success or the mark or the quickness of a student, the ability to pick up on something, each person has something valuable to contribute. So it really helps in collaborative tasks because it gives a structured practice for what I expect of them. You know, I don't want it to break off into groups and one person dominates. They're all a part of it. I think the big thing is that it's not it's not like a pedagogical wonderful thing. It's just super fun and it has amazing benefits. And I think when the teacher and the students are both really enjoying themselves, learning's so much easier. When I'm having a good time, whatever I'm doing is all good. I don't know. I think that's the main gist. It just makes everything a bit more, like we get along, like we know one another.
It makes things more enjoyable. I think once learning becomes enjoyable and the classroom environment is one that's enjoyable, it helps the students to relax. It helps them to enjoy the learning, and then that's going to impact them long term. I think because they're going to remember those lessons where, you know, they were known and they were included and they could constantly just be involved in every bit of things and know that even if they contributed something that ended up being wrong, you know, that didn't actually affect who they were, or, you know, it was just part of what's going on in your classroom. Getting things wrong is actually a really good part of what's happening.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been a catalyst for other things. So, you know, we've had a circle question where, like, okay, if we were to make a class playlist, what would it be? And I'm on Spotify making it live, and then I can collaborate and I can share it with them. So then they all list a song and we have a class playlist, and then we use that in an activity later as well, because they're all like, oh, but my song's next, and they all identify with what we've created, which was just a casual 10-minute thing. And I've noticed also that if I forget, I get pulled up really quick, miss what is our circle question.
So the question I think a lot of teachers are going to have you found that you've run out of time for teaching the stuff that you actually had to teach throughout the year? Like, I'm not talking about in a single lesson. I think in single lessons it could happen. There'll be other lessons where you had time left over at the end. But have you found throughout the year that you've struggled to get through content because you've devoted, you know, time at the beginning every single lesson to this circle time?
I actually think, on the contrary, students, because they look forward to it, it's almost like it's like a reward, but it's the start. And so I might say to them, last lesson, we didn't get through enough, so we're not doing circle time at the start of this lesson. I've only done it maybe twice. And at the end of the lesson, the bell's gone, and they say, can we just do circle time before we go? After the bell has gone. Like, so usually, and that's not saying every class and all the time. Obviously, kids are like, bye, I'm going to recess. But I've also set it up so that you can't do a life story in that time. And if a student just sits there and goes, well, I go, okay, next. And we plow through. So, but it would be 10 minutes at the start of each lesson. Our lessons are about an hour. Sometimes it means I need to maybe put a bit more structure in it, use an online timer when I wasn't going to, or something like that, just to make things more concise. As a general rule, no. But then I would also say it doesn't have to be every single lesson. Like, people can use it however they would like to. But I think it's powerful. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to encourage listeners to try it this week, to come up with a question that you're going to ask all of your students at the beginning of your lesson, and to go around and see what happens, see if you learn stuff about your students that you didn't know yet already. Esther, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, my pleasure. And guys, if you want that list of questions that Esther already has compiled together for you, please make sure you head over to teacherspd.net/95. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would leave us a review. And of course, make sure that you subscribe and come back and join me next week. Bye for now.